Hello, 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 hello. Today I'm talking with Dave Farley. We talked about learning as he goes, Amdahl's Law, and collaborating with his son.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello, hello everyone, and hello with me I have Dave Farley. Is that how I should pronounce your name?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
That's
My dad's joke was you can call me anything you like as long as it's not late for my dinner.
right. Okay, that's a nice one. And Dave, well, I'm recording this from Belgium, and let's show a little bit. Oops, my screen didn't want to work on. So I'm here in Ghent, in Belgium, and we can go to Bridport. Is that how I should pronounce it? Where I
Bridport,
think
yeah.
you are, and that shows us a little bit. It's not that far away in miles
Yeah,
or
if
in
you can see to
kilometers.
the right on the map where it says Walditch, I'm just above there.
Right. Well, the goal is not to help stalkers and not to give the exact location available, of course. And on my side, it's about 20 minutes after 5 o'clock in the evening. What's the time on your side?
20 minutes past 4.
Because yeah, we are a time zone difference. It's just one time zone or one hour difference, I would
Yeah.
say. Exactly. Dave, for the few people that don't know you, before we jump into the questions, what do you want people to know about you?
So I spent my career in software development, mostly at the slightly more complicated end of things. I used to work for PC manufacturers, building operating system, device drivers, BIOSes, things like that. And then later got interested in distributed systems and did a lot of those things. I ended my software development part of my career building ultra high performance trading systems for the finance industry, building exchanges and things like that. I'm probably best known for two things. One of them is being one of the authors of a book called Continuous Delivery, which was very popular. And another book, maybe, called Modern Software Engineering. But the other thing is I run a YouTube channel, which is very successful. And we've got hundreds of thousands of subscribers and lots of views every month. So people may know my work from one of those things.
Yeah, I think when I looked last time, you had like more than 12 million views or something like that. So on
Yeah.
total, that's rather impressive. And there's actually when we Google agile things on YouTube, we find a lot of crap. But this is really, for me, one of the better channels that really has hardcore content in from a technical point of view, I would say, because that's
Yes,
what most
I definitely come at things from a technical point of view. And if it's not evident from the kinds of things that I was talking about mentioning things like continuous delivery, I'm a long-term believer in agile development, and I got infected with extreme programming in the late 90s, and very soon after Kent Beck wrote his book on the topic. And so I've been working using an agile approach to software development for well over 20 years, probably closer to 30 years by now.
Mhm. Yeah, that's and I think both of your books, well, especially the first one that you've written with Jess about continuous delivery, I think brought a lot of things to for people for the first time about okay, how do we do some of that? Um, I remember already trying out some things like continuous integration, but that book really had a big impact on me and a lot of other people because it was so practical. Like, okay, it was not just theoretical. It was like, okay, this is how you need to do it. And I think on your YouTube channel you had a review with Jess, I think a year ago. I don't know exactly, but when you reviewed it, and I think well, a lot of it still stands, and that you're still behind a lot of the ideas that were originally in that book, I would say. Or am I
Yeah,
wrong?
thank you. It was a very successful book, and much more much more widely read than either Jez or I thought it was going to be when we were writing it. We thought that some of our friends would read it.
Well, then you have a lot of friends. That's also a possibility.
Yeah.
And well, for the people, they're actually, both of them are somewhere there, but let's show them. Oh yeah, so both of these books, Continuous Delivery and the Modern Software Engineering, which is also a book that I really loved, because it, again, you talk about well, some of the experience you talk that you said with high availability and fast messages and everything, that for a lot of people don't always realize that when you do continuous delivery and all of these things, that it doesn't mean that it can be used in these kind of environments, and actually that it's crucial to use in these kind of environments.
Yeah, it's so one of the places that I worked that kind of gave birth to that book, really. We were building what turned out to be one, if not the highest performance financial exchange in the world, at a company called LMAX. And so we were doing some very innovative things, but didn't know how to do those things. So we were learning as we went, which is really the agile way. And we were discovering how to solve these difficult problems. And what we found was that we needed kind of what these days I think of as engineering style thinking, and we started to apply them. So that was really the idea that gave birth to that book. But I've come, certainly a couple of years ago, there was a bit of a fashion to talk about what is post-agile, what comes next, and I think that's kind of the right question and kind of the wrong question. So it's right in that I think we should always be looking to improve things that we're doing, but I think it's slightly a misread of what agile thinking is, because agile thinking is, I've come to believe that it's sort of a very practical application of scientific style reasoning to solving problems in software. And I think the next step beyond that is true software engineering. So, agile thinking starts with the assumption that whatever our ideas are, they're probably wrong. And so we're going to organize our work in a way so that we can find out where they're wrong very quickly and correct them. And we organize, if we do this stuff well, we do that for everything, really. Everything that we do, the requirements process, the software that we build, the testing that we do, the product in production, everything. We want to treat those as little experiments that we can try out and evaluate what's going on. And I think that was kind of implicitly understood from the birth of, the term agile. Anyway, when the bunch of people went to the ski resort and signed the document, the Agile Manifesto. I don't think that goes out of fashion. I think that one of the things that I learned through my adoption of those principles and applying them to my work was we can take that lesson just a little bit further, and that turns what we do into engineering. So there are practices that I think, well, no, I don't think, the evidence says if you follow these practices, we can guarantee that you'll get a better result than if you don't. And that's the kind of thing that we'd expect from an engineering discipline, but not necessarily are used to people being able to say about just the software development process.
I like that. Well, I want to go a little bit back, and then I'll let you continue, because when you talked about the birth of Agile, I think what many people seem to forget is that very first sentence from the Agile Manifesto, like, we're uncovering better ways to developing software, and that is such an important part about Agile. We are learning while we're doing. That's a little bit what I hear you say. And that is the part which is in Agile. And I think it was G.B. Reinsberger who said here on the show as well, that said, for me, Agile is like, it's not just making it's about whatever decision we want to take, if I doubt between A and B, I will select the one that is the easiest to change back, and that's the one that is so important.
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you agree, but you already said you agree.
Absolutely. That I think about it in different terms, which I may have just said, but I think about what we're really looking for is the freedom to be wrong. We want the freedom to be able to make a mistake and to safely recover from it. So we're going to choose those easy routes forward, those easy options, so that they're easy to step back. And we're going to work in smaller steps so that they're easier for us to revert and to step back as well. And I think those are deeply the philosophy of agile thinking. And as I say, I think that this is not something that will ever go out of fashion, because fundamentally what we're talking about, when we talk about ideas like inspect and adapt, we are talking about the foundational ideas of what science is, really. So sure, there's lots of detail of how science is practiced that is very different to how agile software development is practiced. And there's lots of science that's practiced poorly, and there's lots of software development called agile software development that's practiced poorly. But that doesn't take away from the foundational ideas, which is let's have a small idea, let's try it out and figure out whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. And we'll keep doing it if it's good and discard it if it's bad. And that's a very powerful idea that underpins nearly everything else that we do. So why not software development, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I think
I fully accept that there's some Scrum teams in big organizations that don't work anything like that, but that's a different argument.
That's indeed, there is a difference between what is agile and how agile is practiced. Let's go too much into detail. But if people want to learn more about the scientific part, I think your that second book that I just shown is indeed going a lot more into detail about why it's called software engineering, and that it's really engineering as a scientific part of it. And I think, well, knowing you, will probably go even more into some of these things along the way if we're talking more. Maybe one thing that I want to go out when you say there is evidence, I kind of think what kind of evidence you're talking about, but what would be your preferred way of showing that evidence? Or where's the data, basically?
So the data that I generally refer to is that from the State of DevOps report over a series of years, compiled by the Dora group, and that's now part of Google. So this is, as far as I can find, and I have looked, this is the most credible scientific academic study of software development practice that has been undertaken. And they've looked at well over 50,000 submissions by now from a vast range of different projects and different types of projects. And I think they came up with some very clever metrics to use. So the Dora metrics are based on measures of stability, the quality of the software that we produce, and throughput, the efficiency with which we can produce software of that quality. And when you combine those two, high scores on both of those things predict some remarkable things and identify some really interesting ideas. So one of the big ideas that's predicted by these numbers is there's no trade-off between quality and speed. If you want to build software fast, you must build high quality software. If you want to build high quality software, you must move fast. That is in many small steps. And that's counterintuitive. That's, we've had whole software development approaches that are built on the opposite assumption that if we want to build high quality software, we've got to be more
slow down
and add change approval boards and all of this kind of thing, and doesn't work. And we have the data.
They've got the
evidence. Yes, they've got the data to prove it.
And what I like so much also about the Dora metrics is that it's not just about the quality. It also shows in the results of the companies that apply these that actually are better companies from a financial point of view, and I think even better retention of developers and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, all of those findings are true. So the customers like the software better. The organizations that work like this make more money than organizations that don't. The developers have a nicer time. They report higher scores on work-life balance. Staff retention is higher in organizations like those. And you build better software faster. And so it's kind of a win-win-win-win-win-win-win. There's everybody has more fun doing this. It's more effective and more efficient. I think that when we talk about organizing software development like this, which is really fundamentally what, to my mind, continuous delivery is all about. Continuous delivery is one of the core predictors, and predictors of success and predictions as outcomes of the Dora metrics. So if you work in this way, you do build better software faster and get all of these knock-on effects. And so I think that what we're talking about here is a paradigm shift, a genuine rethink about what software development really is and how we should undertake it. That's been a thrust of my work for the last 10 years anyway, is trying to pull that together and describe what I mean by that.
Both explains a little bit about the success of your first book, like, okay, because that if you do it, then you have these results, and at the same time it kind of proves why it's hard on all the work that you do, because it's so counterintuitive to do these kind of things, and it's really hard for people who've never done it to first try it and believe it, and especially if they're coming from, like you said, some of these methodologies that said the exact opposite.
Yes, and that's the downside, really, is that there's all these huge benefits. And I mean, if you start looking at the numbers in terms of the efficiency and the quality and all those sorts of things, we're not talking about small percentage improvements. We're often talking about orders of magnitude on some kinds of measurements. And this is a different world. And so there's huge value in all of that. But it's such a challenging thing to adopt. It's such a difficult thing to switch from. These days, I make my living as a consultant, usually advising large companies in the adoption of continuous delivery. I spent last week with a team that was doing just that. And there are so many barriers, and barriers that will be familiar to everybody that's works in software development: legacy code, legacy organizational thinking, waterfall style development, covered over with approaches like Scrum or SAFe. All of those things, lack of a focus on quality engineering in the software that we produce, poor focus on automated testing and optimizing feedback, all of these things. So there's so many things that we need to get right and need to adjust to really be practicing continuous delivery. But the value is there to be had. And the other kind of empirical evidence for that is, I think it's true that, with one exception, which I don't know, if we think of the kinds of organizations that we think of as exemplary for software development, all of them, except Apple, and that's because I don't know what Apple do inside, because they don't talk about it much, but all of the rest of them practice continuous delivery in some form or another. Amazon, Netflix, Google, Tesla, SpaceX, Microsoft, and many, many, many more. They all practice continuous delivery and agile development, which is an ultra agile development process in some form. So
they might not call it agile anymor for whatever reasons, but indeed they're doing it, and that's indeed a very thing. Okay, let's move to that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about who you are, but has influenced in who you are?
So what people probably know if they know any of my work is that I'm a nerd, but my nerdism takes multiple dimensions, and one of those dimensions is that I'm a profound lover of physics. I'm a hobbyist physicist, and so I'm interested in cosmology and quantum physics, quantum field theories, and things like that. And I'm really intrigued by those. So I spend a lot of my spare time learning about those. And I think that's one of the things that gives me this love of science and belief in it being humanity's most important invention. And, why I think we should be applying that style of thinking to building better software.
And how did you get attracted to these kind of things?
That's a more difficult question to answer. I've always been intrigued by those things. I think most children are. I just never lost the love of it. But children. I have grandchildren now, so they love seeing. We go out for a walk. They love seeing little creatures in the forest and things like that. They love it when I do little science experiments at home in the kitchen and stuff like that with water and things like that, and they get excited about these kinds of ideas and these sorts of things. So I was certainly one of those sorts of boys a long time ago, and went on. I had a couple of good teachers, and so I've always been interested in that. The internet, since that came, I was an adult before the internet became popular and widely available. The availability of information now is so remarkably wonderful that that's definitely liberated my interest and allowed me to learn lots more and learn a lot more quick, or more easily and more quickly, I suppose. But I think that's had a big influence on it's not direct perhaps, but certainly it colors the way that I think about nearly everything, but certainly about software development.
I can imagine, and I really like what you weaved into it with the fact that we didn't have internet when we grew up, because nowadays, if there is any discussion at my kitchen table, my children will just immediately grab their phone and do fact checking, which I love. It's not always nice, but it's really good, because it's what we should do much more. In a scientific way, like, okay, what you're saying, I have a hard time to believe. What does the data set? What is, and that is a lot harder. We had to do our own experiments in a way. But I really like also what you say, in the fact that you had a lot of that love, but you didn't lost it. So there was no way that the society took that love away from you, which I sometimes see with a lot of adults, that somehow we get tricked into no longer being curious and no longer having that kind of thing. So
I never lost that. So when I was working on the team where we built the financial exchange, I was recruited by one of my best friends, Martin Thompson, who's an expert in high performance computing, and we did all of the final interviewing for the technical staff as they were coming in to work for us on this very challenging problem. And we used to talk about looking for the people who were I don't know whether you're old enough or not, maybe you are, but we were looking for the kind of people that took the video recorder apart when they first saw one. So that kind of intellectual curiosity to understand about how things worked, that's my real love of physics. I want to have it doesn't have to be precise, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'd like to have a working model of how things work. And that's one of the things that I'm always looking for.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to tear down the video recorder, but I could indeed. Well, maybe that was my first kind of programming, because indeed you sometimes had to program it, and they were sometimes hard devices, just figuring out to setting the time, which not many people did sometimes. But I do remember indeed being allowed to. Break down an old radio that no longer worked, just look at the insides, still having the idea I can fix it, and also at the same time not being careful because I didn't realize that could have been dangerous. That there are parts that still had electricity inside, even if it was disconnected, which was kind of the dangerous thing. But yeah, playing around with these kind of things, tinkering is really what learns us how a certain thing works. And these days, my oldest, he's having a hard time thinking about, okay, you really had a television where there was no remote. For him, it's like, that's so insane that you don't have a remote. It's so easy to make that. Now it is, but in these days that was just normal to not have a remote and all these kind of things. So that's I really like that, how that, and it's very clear how that has influenced you, because also, indeed, if you look at both of your books, you talk about some of that learning sessions and some things. So let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you?
I don't really. So when I left school, I wasn't planning on software as a career. So one of my other loves growing up was flying and aeroplanes, and I couldn't afford to do that. So I used to build model aeroplanes and so on. And so I went to join the RAF and become a fighter pilot. And it took them 3 interviews to realize that I was too tall to be a fighter pilot. You'd think I'd have a door that you couldn't walk through or something, but so I was a bit lost for a while, because I'd thought growing up that that's what I was going to do, and then I didn't get to do it. But I did later become a private pilot and did quite a lot of flying. So maybe if I could have found another route into flying, I might have done that. But I think I was lucky in with hindsight, because I ended up having a wonderful career doing something that I loved.
What triggered you to move into software at that time?
What triggered me? So I left school at the time of one of the economic depressions in the UK, and so I didn't have a job for a long time, and so I was busy trying to find something to do, and I was getting a bit lost at the time. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, went round my family one Christmas and got them all to put together some money to buy me a home computer. I'd played with a home computer that her father had borrowed from where he worked, and loved it. So they bought me a home computer, and so I learned to program really on that and started writing.
And that was giving you that computer was the intention so you could learn to program, or that was just...
In those days, you didn't really have a computer without programming, because they didn't do very much. You could load games off cassette tapes, but that was about it. She certainly didn't organize it because in order to get me a job, but it was just something nice to do because I liked doing it. So I fell in love with programming quite quickly, and I was trying to write games, and I was writing them in BASIC originally, and my computer in those days was way too slow to be able to do a decent game in BASIC. So I quickly switched and learned to program in assembler and started writing games, some of them commercially, and had a huge amount of fun and learned a lot, and decided that was what I wanted to do for a career. So it was my hobby, and my hobby turned into my career eventually.
So that's a nice way to get into a career, I would say.
It is.
And do you still enjoy it as much as you did? Because sometimes when people have a hobby and they turn it into a career, they sometimes feel like, oh, now I've lost my hobby. But I have the feeling with you, it still feels as a hobby, you still like it, or am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. So certainly, if you there's a reason why people give us money to do work, to work for them. It's because there's bits of it that you don't want to do. So if it was my hobby, I'd be doing it for free all of the time. So, but I do love it, and in particular, I still love writing code. I don't spend as much time or get as much time for writing code these days as I would like, but I do still get a little thrill when I'm writing code and I'm just doing those little steps to try and understand a problem and to evolve my solution. I do love that kind of thinking. So yeah, I consider myself to have been enormously fortunate to find something that I could make a good career from, that was a passion, that was something that I genuinely loved doing. And so I still love the kind of technical problem solving. So I'm a sucker for hard problems. I like it when the problem's difficult, and I don't know how to solve it. And it's that process of discovering how to solve a problem that I really enjoy.
And what you said earlier on, but I think also what I kind of know about you is that you try to address it with small little steps and seeing, okay, how could I get one more thing? How could I verify that my assumption is right and maybe I'm wrong and I learn something else? That's a little bit.
Yeah, always in small steps. I've been, during the course of my career, I've been extremely lucky to work with some genuinely great software developers. And if I could identify one characteristic that seems to be common amongst the great software developers, is that they make progress in very small steps. And after each small step, they're just checking again. It requires us to be a little bit diligent, a little bit cautious about everything that we do, because software is this weird, fragile stuff otherwise, and it's too easy to make a mistake. So the good ones, to me, seem really skilled at making the progress in these tiny little steps.
Yeah, along the way, even small. Well, what I've seen for myself, but I think also with a lot of people, is that whenever I fail or when it's something like, okay, how could I turn it to an even smaller step and see, is there anything? And then, because that's usually how some of it is, that every time I think this is a small step, especially with a new problem, it turns out that it was even a too big step, and that there's things that make it even smaller.
Yeah,
that's
every now and again you find yourself walking deeper and deeper into trouble, and you realize that you're trying to do too much in one go. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, I really like that, and I think we'll maybe talk about some of that stuff more. Let's actually, and for me it kind of feels right into that third question. What do you consider at this point your biggest challenge, and why is that then a good thing for you? And at least the biggest challenge you want to share openly on the internet.
Sure. I think my biggest challenge in life is bringing up children. I have two boys that I'm very, very proud of, but it's hard work. It's a difficult thing, and the feedback loops are really, really tough, because you don't know whether you're doing a good job or not until they're grown up.
Years later, you, damn it, I did that wrong.
Yeah. But I'm very proud of my boys, and that was lovely. That was sort of the biggest challenge. The biggest technical challenge, I think it was probably in building the financial exchange that I've referred to a couple of times. That was just such a hard problem, and we learned such a lot. We came up with a fairly innovative architectural approach and built some very cool software indeed, and went quite deep into the way in which the hardware worked in order to be able to maximize the advantage that we took from it. We came up with an idea that we called mechanical sympathy. So writing our software, taking advantage of that hardware, the capabilities of the hardware, to the close to the optimal way that we could do that. And that involved all sorts of interesting, intricate learning to be able to do all of those things. But we ended up doing something very cool indeed. on a broader, less specific front, I think that's a version of something that's interested me for a much longer time, which is a world-class difficult problem, I think, which is the problems of distributed systems. So a lot of the systems that I've been involved in building for a long time now have been properly distributed systems where there's compute going on in a variety of different places. And that's not easy. I think there are some fairly strong analogues to quantum physics in that. There's uncertainty. So you could think of, if you've got information in two places and it's changing in both places, then you've got a superposition of information until we collapse those two together and merge them in some way and decide which one's the truth. We don't know the answer to that question. And this is really deep, hard stuff. And I quite enjoy theorizing and thinking about that kind of thing and trying to solve problems in that sort of space. But
and when you talk,
I enjoy the hard problems.
That's what I wanted to go to. You enjoy these things, and I think in the financial application that you were building, it was definitely needed. I think, you needed to have such a distributed system because that information it needed to flow fast, I would say.
Yeah.
Do you think it's? I sometimes have the feeling that we have too quickly that people trying to use distributed systems where it's not always needed. Is that something you recognize 100%. As well?
Yeah. So it's one of the things that we learned. So when we were building our ultra fast exchange, we had an idea for what we thought was the ideal software architecture. Mm-hmm. So we did the agile thing. We built the simplest version of that we could, and we measured the performance, and it was not even close to fast enough. And so we kind of honed down our measurements, and the thing that we built was a thing called a staged event-driven architecture. And the idea is that you divide the compute up into a series of stages, and that any given stage always runs on the same thread, so that there was no data sharing was the idea. And so we built this system, and we built an exchange on the basis of it, and it was 10 or 20 times too slow, dramatically too slow. So then we're going, so started looking, so we started measuring where the problem was. We calculated that we were spending more time deciding which thread to run some logic on than we were running the logic. So we just put the logic on a single thread. So the core of our exchange could process 6.5 million transactions per second.
And that's
trades.
And this is why you need data to look into the details and to look, having observability and whatever to really see where is really our problem. Because if you don't have that, basically you probably would have changed and took a whole different kind of architecture where it shows that there was, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, but there was only one small part that was a problem and not everything.
Yes. Yeah, so we ended up architecting our systems as distributed services, but each one was kind of a rich domain model that was single-threaded. So we could get a message to that very quickly. It could process the message, and then it generates another message. So it was very event-driven. It was very stateful. The in-memory state of each of these little domain models was the system of record for this ultra-high performance system. And there were loads of interesting problems that we had to solve to achieve all of that. We open sourced some of the tools that we built to make it run. But going back to your earlier points, I think that in my role as a consultant, perhaps one of the most common mistakes that I see people make is jumping too quickly to distributed solutions. Don't do distribution, don't do concurrency unless you really have to, because it's so hard to get it right. It's so easy to make dumb mistakes. And the performance gains aren't usually what you think. There's a thing from, I'm not sure whether it's the 60s or the 70s, but there's a thing called Amdahl's law from either the 1960s or the early 70s that's about the scalability of parallel processing. And that's not about the technology, it's about the fundamental, the mathematics of parallelizing a problem. If 95% of your problem is in the parallel part of the solution, whatever that is, the best that you can do is you can get a factor of 20 increase. And you get that only if you've got 2048 parallel processing nodes. So just throwing parallelism at problems isn't the way of speeding up. You have to have the right kind of problem in order to be able to parallelize it. And that's part of the complexity and the art of distributed programming, figuring out where you can and where you can't distribute things, where it's sensible to allocate behavior separately. Just throwing threads at a regular problem usually doesn't help much. We did all sorts of interesting measurements of some of these performance when we were building our exchange, and the cost of things like locks or synchronization or compare and swap instructions, which is the most optimal way of sharing information between threads at the hardware level. The costs of those starts at a factor at 2 orders of magnitude slower than just doing things on one thread. So you need more than 10 threads to equal the performance. It's ridiculous.
And then we have people who want to throw it out all over the internet of multiple things and not even thinking about the latency that we have on all these kind of things.
So we have to. It's a more complicated problem than it seems. So you have to think very carefully. There's obviously a good place for parallelizing things. As long as we don't have to join things back up together again, then that's a very efficient way to do things. We can parallelize. GPUs parallelize things beautifully because they don't care about what's happening on the next pixel. They're looking they're just figuring out what color a particular pixel will be. So it's a very parallelizable problem. But many problems that we solve with software aren't like that. And so if it's not like that, parallelizing things will make it go slower and it'll be more complicated usually.
And then you have even more problems than before. I really like it. And I think it's already very clear for the people that didn't know you how driven and how passionate you are. And that actually goes immediately to my next question. Do you know where that passion, where that drive is coming from?
Not really. I'm just that sort of person. As I said, I like to know how things work. And I think that's perhaps my fundamental thing.
And is that something, because you said earlier on when you were young, you already had that? Was that triggered in a way by your parents or your surroundings? Or how was that just the natural boy that you were? Or
my parents were supportive. I was, without being immodest, I was quite bright as a child. I did quite well at school and those sorts of things. But my parents were very supportive, but they didn't have a scientific background or anything like that. So I don't really know where that comes from. But it is something that drives me, and I'm just what I have discovered since I've been an adult is that one of my passions is that I love learning things, and so it almost doesn't matter what I'm learning. I like learning almost anything, and so I suppose that's a bit weird, but I watch an inordinate amount of YouTube these days because there's such a diverse range of things. I watch videos about sailing, I watch videos about wood turning, I watch videos about paragliding, or all sorts of things, as well as software, just because I'm interested in nearly everything.
Because that YouTube, you can definitely go into a rabbit hole and keep learning. So is there any way how you select these things, or you just let it come to you like, oh, this is interesting? How does that work for you?
I've certainly got a range of topics, and I've just listed a bunch of them that I go back to often. And I've got, I follow the channels that I'm interested in and those sorts of things like everybody else. But there's nothing I like better than to hit on something by accident that I never thought of watching, and for it to capture my attention. I really like that. So I am open. I try to stay open to trying stuff out. I watched a really silly thing recently that made me laugh. I'm not sure about learning, but there's a man with a small group of huskies and a small group of cats in his apartment, and he started challenging them by blocking the corridor to their food with different barriers, and then filming them trying to negotiate these barriers. And you could see the animals learning how to solve these problems as they were going through. I watched this video for about half an hour, but it was very funny. But I just find trying to understand things interesting. I just do.
And interestingly enough, it's again about learning, but then from animal point of view, and you might learn something about how, I don't know, other animals are learning, because that's sometimes what we don't always realize. Indeed, that it's not because they're not human that they cannot learn. And I've seen some videos from, I don't know, bees or whatever, learning to take screws and whatever, that you always say, like, how the hell do they end up learning these kind of things?
Yeah.
But somehow, that's indeed. But it shows again your passion for learning and doing it. And YouTube, it's really something that I see with my children as well. That, like, and also myself, like, it's much easier to find something on YouTube on how to do it than finding back the manuals that I have somewhere down there, like, okay, how to do something, and I just Google it or search on YouTube, and then I find what I need to do in a much more, well, it's harder to quickly scan it than you could do with a text, but you learn it on a much profound level, I would say. That's indeed.
It certainly works for me.
Definitely, I recognize that also for myself and with my children as well. Well, let's move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest achievement so far? And maybe what I've noticed on the show is that when I ask this question, this is basically your moment to brag and to be really proud. Is that easy for you, Dave, to be proud and to brag about something? Before we jump into what you're proud about,
I don't. It's not easy, but at the same time, I would be being untruthful if I didn't say that there weren't things that I was proud of. There are things that I'm proud of. My biggest achievements are kind of, to do with my family and that sort of thing. But in work terms, I suppose there are a few things. So I'm very proud of a range of things from my career, but certainly the LMAX project, where we built the exchange that I keep talking about, and the technology and the sort of kind of stuff that I've talked about. But the thing that I'm most proud of from there was that nearly all of us that worked there had a great time, and we all grew as a result of that. We were a really great team. It's a really effective team, and I'm good friends with a number of the people that I worked with there, and some of them, it was their first job. So I believe that we helped to start the careers of some very good software developers on the right path. So I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the success of the continuous delivery book. It was enormously surprising. A couple of years ago, the publishers, Pearson's, contacted me to say that continuous delivery had been voted the 25th most influential software book about software of all time, which was awesome. I mean, I can think of 25 books that I think are at least as important, but that's
and
very
you
cool.
have that list on your YouTube channel, I would say, about, I don't know if it's 25 or whatever, but there is that list of books that are important for you. But I would, well, one of the things that I like about that book is that it's still usable after all these years. it's and I think there's not many books into IT that have such a lifespan.
Yeah.
That's
those are the things that interest me. I'm interested in the durable ideas. If we can, what are the things at the core of our profession that don't really change? That's something that really interests me as a topic. The other thing that
you didn't know when you were writing, you had no idea about that impact. That's also what you said.
No, right? None at all. So we thought we were onto something good, but we didn't know that we could write a book that would be able to express that clearly enough to help other people to achieve it. But we did. So the other thing that I'm extremely proud of was another kind of accident, really, and that's the YouTube channel. So we're up to nearly 220,000 subscribers. As you say, we have hundreds of thousands of views a month. Close on, I think it's getting towards 15 million views in total, something like that. But
for something that exists less than 5 years, if I'm correct,
yeah.
right?
So it was born of the pandemic. So I was working as an independent consultant and traveling all over the world, and was really busy. And when the first lockdown happened in the UK, all of the work that I was booked for the coming year kind of fell off a cliff. So I was talking to my son, who was in digital marketing, about what to do over a glass of wine. And I said I was thinking of doing putting some of my conference presentations online on YouTube. And he said, well, if you're going to do YouTube, do it properly. And then he started teaching me what properly meant. So the YouTube channel is largely a function of me and my son Tom collaborating on being able to do that. So he kind of steers how to promote things effectively on YouTube. We kind of collaborate on what topics to do, and then I kind of generate the content. And what I'm most proud of from that is so we've released at least one video per week for 5 years without interruption, which is quite hard work.
Know what it is to release a weekly video, and like I said in the pre-talk, I hardly do any editing.
Yeah.
Your videos are really well edited, and there is short videos. There is a lot of other content that you keep bringing out. So yeah, I know that it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible what you do. I really like also the way that you say it. I love what I call parent-child's collaborations. It shows us it really showed. I've worked both with my father and with my children, and I've learned so much from doing that, and it creates a different kind of connection that I think it's really wonderful. I think it probably teaches you as much about what he's good at and what his skills are, and he's understanding some more about some of that things that you
absolutely. That's been wonderful. But the reach of YouTube is impressive. It is staggering what the impact of having access to all of those people. So we get lots of feedback on every video, usually, and on Twitter, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, all of those channels, as well as on YouTube itself. And yeah, there's the tiny, vanishingly small proportion that's objectionable or unpleasant, and you learn how to cope with that. But the vast majority of it is positive. And my favorite kind of feedback, the thing that I'm really proud of, is that every day, certainly every week, maybe every day, I get somebody saying, I tried this thing that you recommended and it worked for me like this, which is wonderful. If I've been able to help people, make a change in the way in which they're approaching their work. And I think I've probably triggered by now probably thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people to learn test-driven development. And if that's true, I'm very, very proud of that.
way that much more than training. I mean, and if you would need to train all these people yourself, that's almost impossible. I mean, physically going into training rooms with them, it's almost impossible. And
Yeah.
that kind of scales you to a larger audience as well, I would think.
Yes.
And that's really nice. And I think it was also very needed because before you started that YouTube channel, there was actually a lot of rubbish to be found on the internet, on YouTube particular, about agile, about some of the things
Yeah.
where people that have done some of that all would say like, oh no, that's not what this means. And that's really nice that then someone who did write the book on continuous delivery and did a lot of test-driven development can actually say like, oh, that's maybe what you think it is, but in reality, this is what it really is.
Oh, thank you
that-
for that. I'm proud of the work. You know, it could always be better. I'm always critical of what I'm doing and when I'm stumbling over my words and all that kind of stuff. But it's had a positive impact, and yeah, I'm proud of our ability to spread the word, if you like.
But I think, and on top of that, what I want to add as well is that you also give a platform to, because you have your engineering room, that's one thing, but you also have like, I think by now 1 or 2 people that are also regulars on the show that you give out a platform.
Yes,
I would say.
and we are expanding on that, partly to relieve the burden on me, so that I don't have to be coming up with a video every week. But no, seriously. So we are expanding that because I think it's important. We'd like to be a place that people can go to get good advice, and so we're definitely expanding that. We'll be making some announcements about new presenters fairly soon.
Oh, really cool, really cool. But that does mean that for the back office, I would say the editing, there is a lot more work. Maybe you're offloaded, but the back office still needs to do a lot of more work.
So the as a side effect, so at the time when I talked about when we started the YouTube channel, the company that I run was basically me with my wife doing some of the kind of company admin stuff. Now we employ half my family, so and a couple of other people. So we're still a small business, but off the back of that, we're a bigger organization than we were before, and we are growing and have some ambitions for things to do coming up. So
you can do it all from home. You were forced to do it because of the pandemic, but I think, well, knowing I think a lot of the people who are doing consultancy and agile coaching or whatever, when you need to go with clients, you basically have to be a lot not at home. That allows you, I think, would also to work much from home and have a different kind of work-life balance, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely the case, and it's I traveled enough before the pandemic to not really want to travel like that ever again. It was too much.
Right.
So these days, I do still travel for work occasionally, but usually it's either to be with people that I want to work with, or to go to a place that I'd like to be.
Yeah, you're not the only one. I think Lisa Atkins said something similar, like, I still go to places, but they have to kind of prove to her that it makes sense to do it physically and not remotely. Especially
absolutely.
sometimes a lot of us, we went to another part of the world just for 1-day workshop, and basically you're lost 2 more days to travel over there. And
Exactly.
it's costly on the time of the family, it's costly on the planet and a lot of other things. And like, does it really make sense? Maybe I can do it remotely, so or do something else. So, I recognize a lot of what you said. Let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip to share?
I have too many. I think we've already talked about perhaps the most profound one, which is working in small steps. So taking that aside for a minute, let's assume that I think I think that test-driven development is probably at the core of my thinking. Certainly, continuous integration with test-driven development. So I think I said at the start, I started off in terms of my thinking about agile development with extreme programming rather than Scrum. So I was coming at it from the practical engineering side of agility, I suppose. And that certainly informs my thinking about it. And I would describe continuous delivery as a second generation version of extreme programming. Because that's really what it's about. It's working so our software is always in a releasable state and keeping it there. And we do that through high levels of automation, ideally pair programming, lots of testing, test first development. And one of the reasons why I value test-driven development quite so highly is the feedback that I get on the quality of my design. So as I'm writing software, I'd like to know whether my design is on track or not, whether I'm heading in what feels like a sensible direction. And I think that test-driven development gives me that more than anything else that I can think about, anything else that I've ever seen. And so that's why I value it quite so highly. So if you haven't tried test-driven development, I would recommend that you do try it. If you go to my YouTube channel, there are links to free tutorials on test-driven development that you can try. So I think that's probably my biggest tip. If you're not doing test-driven development, you ought to be. So try it out, learn the skills, and start doing it.
So basically, what I'm also hearing, kind of underneath with what you said earlier in that introduction of that tip, is that you think that you really need to do technical excellence.
Yes.
That extreme programming, everything there is like whatever you do, if you do Scrum or something else, Agile, without technical excellence, you won't get the results. Is that a correct statement, that you believe in that?
I think that is. I am a profound believer in something else that we mentioned earlier on, which is the findings from the Dora metrics, is that there's no trade-off between speed and quality. If you want to go fast, the correct way to do that is to focus on technical excellence. You need to take work out of the process as far as you possibly can. So you do the minimum amount of work for the maximum output. And you want to be able to work with high quality so you don't have to keep going back and revisiting work that you did before. And so, I think that's probably as good a definition of technical excellence as any. And so working to be able to be in a position to do that, thinking about how to do that, working smart so that we're able to do those things, I think is really what agile development is all about. I don't care whether we have our meetings standing up or not. I understand the reasons. I think there are good reasons. I've done stand-ups for a very long time, but I don't really care whether we have our meetings standing up or not. It's not the primary goal. I don't think that we need to commit to 2 weeks worth of work in a sprint. I don't think that's the primary goal. Producing great software is the primary goal. And the way that we do that is by doing it in small steps that we can evaluate it, each small step. And that's really at the heart of what extreme programming is about, and the ways that I promote.
I bring that back to your YouTube channel, for example. Are there any of these practices that you use? Because that's not software, so you can't do test-driven development. But are there any of these things that you just talked about that you also used when launching your YouTube channel?
I think the philosophy infects nearly everything that we do. So I think we, as a company, as a small family company, I think we're extremely experimental. We try out lots of ideas and we try those out on small. We're big big proponents of the kind of minimum viable product idea, and we try and maximize our output based on our work. So one of the ideas that it's one of the ideas from my wife is what she calls the flywheel effect. So we try and maximize the use of our content so we can release it in a variety of different formats, or make it useful to different people. So we have a monthly series called The Engineering Room, where we have long form interviews with interesting people from the software world. And we make clips of those, and we use those as small YouTube episodes. And so we get listens on Spotify and Amazon and those sorts of places, but we also get views on YouTube from those things. That's all good, and for essentially the same amount of work, we do that kind of thing. We're currently using AI in small ways to help us do various things. We don't write the scripts with AI or anything like that, but we do use it we're trying to make our content more searchable. And so we use AI tools internally for us to be able to find things, so we're doing YouTube shorts at the moment on the YouTube channel, and TikTok videos. I'm not doing those. Somebody else is doing those, another member of the family. So so we've built some AI-based tools using ChatGPT that parse the content of all of our video content and kind of put it into a database, so you can then search for an interesting minute of content. And you can kind of specify what topic that should be on, or just find me interesting minutes of content identified by ChatGPT. And so that helps us identify other forms of content and so on. So we're trying out lots of ideas on relatively small, relatively simple scales, but trying to keep the human creativity in the process. I don't like content that's written by ChatGPT very much, or other LLMs. That it just sounds too mechanical. So you need a bit more personality in it, really.
And I can imagine that when ChatGPT tells you, like, hey, this is a content that many people are interested, you say, oh yeah, I forgot, I know something about it, I can bring it.
Yeah.
Because that's sometimes
exactly. And that's so giving me as a human being inspiration is where those kinds of tools shine, I think. I'm not doing the work, it seems to me, at the moment anyway.
And but I also like that you casually mentioned that, okay, this is actually what my partner came up as an idea.
Yeah.
So it's not just you being the creative person and the other people doing the administrative for the other. It's
teamwork.
Actually it's teamwork, and it's and so you said, I'm not doing you don't always need to have stand-ups. Do you have stand-ups with this team working on
we have what we call a stand-up. So we have so as you said, we're all working from home and distributed. So we have a daily Zoom call that we call the stand-up, but we're not standing up.
As most of us are working these days, it's actually
a
lot of that actually, and that kind of brings me automatically to that next question. What have you learned about remote working? And maybe go. You talked already about how the pandemic changed that you couldn't go out. Did you do any remote working before the pandemic, or was that just your first encounter there?
I had done quite a lot of remote working one way or another before the pandemic. So I'd worked in globally distributed teams, but usually. So I think that I was at a company called ThoughtWorks for a while, which is a consultancy, and I think some of the things that we did in the early days of ThoughtWorks we were kind of pioneering scaling up agile development. And I think that there was certainly a period when we were kind of world experts at doing agile development on a bigger scale. Up until that point,
I think
even people that were writing about it said it was a small team practice.
Well, I think it's also important to mention is that when you started that, when you did that work at ThoughtWorks, I think, well, a lot of these people might no longer be at ThoughtWorks, but it's incredible how many people I know in the industry that I said, and then you discover later on, but oh, you were also at ThoughtWorks and you were there together with this and that person. Like, especially in the UK, it's like insane how many people that worked in ThoughtWorks.
There was a period where ThoughtWorks and ThoughtWorks London in particular, we were kind of like the Xerox PARC of agile thinking for a little while. We innovated a lot. So continuous delivery, the London School of TDD, mocking, BDD. There's a bunch of other things which I can't think of now, but all of those were ideas that originated. Microservices, all of those were ideas that originated in ThoughtWorks and ThoughtWorks London.
And I would say the first build server was built also.
Cruise Control was built by Matt Femmel, an American who was working in London at the time.
That's a lot of these people. The London School of Agile. I don't want to go too much into that, but a lot of people work there. And I still discover sometimes people that I very highly admire that, they also worked at ThoughtWorks. It's kind of a brand, or it was kind of a brand that I'm not sure how true that still is, because I think like there's more than 10,000 people at ThoughtWorks these days. But especially in the beginning, there was I don't know, it inspired and a lot of people.
It was certainly that at the time. I don't really know where it is today. I still have friends at ThoughtWorks, and they're certainly having a fine time and doing some interesting things. But it was a fantastic place to work in the early 2000s when I was there.
Exactly. But we kind of sidetracked. So let's talk a little bit about remote working. What did you learn about remote working?
So ThoughtWorks were doing these larger projects. One of the projects that I was leading, I was the tech principal on, was building one of the large point of sale systems for an electrical retailer in the UK. So we were doing point of sale in 10,000 stores. So it was a big project, and there was a team based in London where I was working. There was a team in Chicago. There was a team in New York. No, a team in Chicago, a team in San Francisco, and a team in Bangalore in India. And so we had almost, but not quite, 24-hour development going on. And we were trying to solve problems of working remotely with one another and the technology. So this was early 2000s, 2003, 2004, around then. And so the internet wasn't as good as it is now. The comms weren't as good as they were now. So we were fighting with things like how slow it was to synchronize repositories between the different sites and all of those kinds of things. But one of the problems was remote working. So we adopted a bunch of policies, which I still recommend to people now. So one of the things that we did was that we tried to make sure that there was always at least one person from the other sites on every site. So you had a personal point of contact to the people in that other place. We regularly encourage people to visit the other places. So again, you've got a human level. It's much easier to call somebody an idiot remote when they're doing something remote to you. If you had a beer with them last week, it's more difficult to call them an idiot.
Or you can easily call them an idiot and they don't feel offended.
Call them an idiot and not mean it. and yeah. So exactly. So you need that kind of personal connection. I think that's important. Later, I was working for a financial trading company, and I was the only person in London, in the London office, on this team, and the rest of the team were in Chicago. So our time zones overlapped by the best was it overlapped by about 3 hours. Sometimes when daylight savings changes were coming in, it was worse than that. So we did remote pairing for 3 hours a day, and then worked alone for the rest of the time. But again, we did the visiting each other to try and keep people in touch on a human level. Technically, I think there's a lot talked about remote working and the technology around it, and I think it's much less a technical problem than it is a human problem. Inevitably, as a result of the pandemic, we all became more used to talking to each other as you and I are talking today through a screen. And that's better than talking just on a phone. It's better than talking on Slack. Being able to interact like this, we can look at one another's body language. It's not as good as if we're in the same room. So there's little trade-offs, but it also makes it easier to share a screen while we're working or whatever. So I think it's pluses and minuses. It's kind of trade-offs. There are positives to working like this, and there are negatives, and you just try and have to work around the negatives and amplify the positives.
And what I like what you said in the beginning, like, okay, well, first of all, the part it's more a human problem than a technical problem.
Yeah.
Although I have to say that I do remember the first days of Skype. I was working remotely as well, and the tools have been so much better. And I think it's much easier today to do remote working because of the tools. And I think the pandemic helped a lot in that to make the tools. So it's the tooling is not the only thing, but having better tools definitely helped, I would say. But like you, in 2004, I also, or in 2005, which was it for me, I had a remote team. And I do remember that, before the stand-up, it was like, okay, basically kind of having people from both sides to pair or talk to each other. And then during the stand-up, it was not a remote stand-up, it was more like, okay, I've learned this. And I know that my partner on the other side had this kind of thing. So we both talked about the things that locally did and the remote team did it. Tools like Jira, well, they did exist, but they were not at the level that they are now. And we both basically had like, how would I call it, a Kanban board on both sides. And I do remember sending pictures over from side to side and then comparing these pictures. I do remember at some point I noticed like, hey, there is a difference between this picture and the remote picture. And that actually told me that we had a problem. If we would have had a Jira that was synced, we would never have noticed that we had forgotten to sync some information. And that's
we did the same thing on the ThoughtWorks projects that I was referring to. We had in each place we had a Kanban board or a card wall anyway, and we kept them in sync, kind of manually, really, rather than having some automated central tool, because we didn't have the tools then. So it was a bit more work, but it worked fine. It wasn't a big problem, it seemed to me. As you say, the technology is driven by the pandemic to some degree. The video conferencing technology, these sorts of tools that you and I are using now, have much improved and made things easier. But even before then, we found ways of making it work. It's one of those things where if you want to find reasons to complain and for it not to work, it's easy to do that. But it's easy enough to find ways of making it work if you want to make it work, it seems to me, and has been for a long time.
And that's it. When you were saying that, I do remember having a discussion I think in a pizza restaurant where we just made a drawing on a napkin. And that's when we came back, we realized, hey, this napkin is so important that we scanned in the napkin and we sent it over email to the other side, like, look at this. And then I think they opened it in Paint and then made some changes to say, this is how it should work. And that was, okay, we didn't have the tools to do it online, but we just figured it out in our kind of way. And that's all these kind of things.
Ultimately, it's about sharing ideas and the human collaboration. It's about us working together in a way that we can get some good outcome, and people are quite good at doing those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I really love what you ended up just before saying, like, okay, it's if really people don't want to do it, there will be an
Yeah,
excuse, but if people want to do it, they'll find a way on how to do
yeah,
it, whatever it is. And then it doesn't really matter if you're physically together.
yeah,
But like you said, if you had a beer or if you had a drink together, you kind of know each other. That really
yeah.
helps in a lot of
I,
things.
I, I, I think certainly, when we're not in the midst of a pandemic, I think it's extremely valuable if you're working remotely to build that into the process, to make sure that people meet in person and build those personal relationships, because it then makes the remote communication work much better, whatever the nature of the remote communication. And that seems to have been always true for me. One more thing that we haven't talked about that I think is really important, that it is commonly done really badly, is the way in which you divide up work. It's stupid it seems to me, to break up work so that I worked with a client a long time ago, and they had product owners and architects in one country in Europe, and developers and testers in another country in India. And so, you know, all of the communication was flying over this big time zone difference and big cultural difference, and so the results weren't very good. So, one of the things that you can do instead is, instead of dividing up work like that, have a development team with all of the skills that you need in one place, and then another development team with all of the skills that you need in another place. So product owners and testers and developers and architects or whatever else in all in one place, and the same all in another. And so that's a better way of distributing things. So you've got more autonomous teams without time zones in the middle of the team.
Yeah, and especially the time zones might make things a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
And that's and knowing each other. I guess, like you say, when you do a sit down stand up with your family, well, you do know each other, and some of them you know
Yeah.
their whole life, so you kind of know it. So that makes a
Yeah.
lot things a lot
It
easier.
makes a big difference to the bandwidth of communication, because we can talk in shorthand. We've got in jokes that we all share, and all of those sorts of things. We know each other well enough to be blunt if we need to be, and so it's a big help. All of those things.
Really well, yeah, and being yeah, the bluntness is really important to when
Yeah,
things are kind of stressy. We need to tell what we like or don't like, and
yeah,
that's again that real feedback loop. Because if
yes,
we just walk around it because we're scared, and then of course if you're from the same family, you have a lot more cultural the same thing. That's the other thing working with remotely, is that we might have completely different kind of cultures which
yeah,
we don't understand. And there's no culture that is better or worse, but it's just like we might not just understand the other culture.
yes,
That's the other part. That's the really wonderful. And I think, well, with a lot of the things that we shared and having that experience in agile, we've seen going a lot more in, like, okay, it's kind of more possible if we think about it, and if we think about all the things that you just said. Let's move to that next question. What is a book that you really want to talk about that you think it's really important to mention here?
There are two books that I think are probably the most important books in the last 10 years. One of them I've already mentioned, which is Accelerate, and the other one is Team Topologies. I think Accelerate gives us a more scientifically rational
And
basis.
this is Accelerate.
Yes,
From Nicole and Jess. Well, Jess, you're also
yes,
your co-writer, but I think mostly Nicole
yeah,
with the research that she started on.
yeah. And the other
Why
one
is
is,
that important? Well, but let's focus first a little bit on this one.
okay.
Why do you consider?
So I think Accelerate moves us onto a sounder footing to be able to claim that what we're doing is engineering. We have concrete measures. I think it was close to genius. It's easy with hindsight, but it was really difficult beforehand to figure out what things to sensibly measure to measure software productivity. And that had been something that had been a big problem for 40 plus years. And close to genius, they came up with 2 measures that are completely generic. Well, 4 measures in 2 categories that are completely generic. So stability measured by change failure rate and mean time to recovery, and throughput measured by lead time, how long it takes you to go from a commit to something releasable, and the frequency of release into production. If you score highly on both of those things, it predicts all of the things that we were talking about earlier. So we have this predictive measure tool based on measurement. We can predict what's going to happen to your organization based on the quality of your work and how fast you produce work of that quality. And that's generic. It says nothing at all about the nature of the software. It doesn't say anything about the problem domain that you're working in. It doesn't say whether you're working in a regulated industry or building web apps or what. It doesn't matter. This is true for all software of any kind. That's remarkable. That's powerful. And so now we have these 2 measures. So I can do something. I could decide, we've been talking about stand-ups. I'm going to improve our stand-ups by having a little cuddly toy that we're going to throw around, and you're not allowed to talk unless you're holding the toy. So that makes everybody else shut up, so it stops us arguing in the stand-ups. That's the theory. So we could do that. We could measure the impact of that choice on stability and throughput. Does it improve the quality of the software that I build? Does it make me build that software more efficiently? If it has no impact, but I like it, I can carry on doing it. If it makes either one worse, I can stop. That's a pretty powerful tool. It's not an arbitrary score is less interesting than using it in that kind of mode, like a speedometer. This is my score today. What happens if I change something? What happens if I adopt some new technology? What if I write this particular thing in Clojure instead of in C#? Whatever else it is, you can make those kind of choices and you can measure the impact. That's powerful.
And what I like about the book as well is that it starts with a story, because there's a couple of books that really help out and like The Goal, which was probably one of the first ones that started out as a novel explaining things.
Yeah.
But then there's that second part. I'm not sure how many people read the second part of the Accelerate book, but it's as interesting because then it dives really deep into the Dora metrics. I'm not sure in the book they were already called Dora metrics, but yeah, it really goes into the whole.
I think it gives us a scientifically rational underpinning for choices in software development, which we've never had before, and I think that's a big step forwards.
True. I really agree. So let's move to the second book. You briefly mentioned already Team Topologies from Matthew and Manuel. What do you like about this book?
So one of the key predictors from the Dora metrics is for success is that the teams are able to make their own choices without being influenced or being directed by anybody outside the team. So they can make choices about the design, the implementation, often even the product direction within the development team. So we need autonomous teams. There's a lovely piece of research that did a metadata analysis of the performance of 4,000 software teams. And they did something really simple. They just counted how long it took each team to get to 10,000 lines of code. They divided up the cohorts into teams of 5 and fewer and teams of 20 and more. So on average, it took 9 months to get to 100,000 lines of code. And as you might expect, on average, the team of 20 people or more were faster. But over a 9-month period, they were faster by 1 week. So a team of 5 people is nearly 4 times as productive as a team of 20 people. So those 2 bits of data say that what we need to develop software efficiently and effectively and with high quality is to have small autonomous teams. So if you want small autonomous teams and you're building something big and complicated, how do you organize the work to do that? team topologies tells us the answer. It describes the organizational structure, how we carve up the teams, how we allocate work to the teams, as a tool that we can use to design organizations to be more effective at building big complex systems. My world is largely in big complex systems, so that's very interesting to me. I'd got some of these ideas which were kind of half-baked, and I used to talk a little bit about when I was consulting. But what Team Topologies has done is put a definitive terminology on what these things mean, and brought lots of other ideas into play that were not really talked about before. So one of the guiding principles in Team Topologies is the idea of minimizing cognitive load. I think you mentioned earlier, we want to work to do simple things. We want to try and find ways of making the work simple. That's about minimizing cognitive load. The Team Topologies book recommends you don't have a team of more than 8 people. So, and then comes up with 4 different types of teams that you compose your organization from. So you have a stream-aligned team, the ones building the features that users would recognize. You have platform teams that build supporting stuff designed to take cognitive load away from the stream-aligned teams. You have enabling teams where you can kind of lend expertise to a stream-aligned team. And you have complex subsystem teams where you have deep expertise that build technically narrow but complicated bits of software that other teams can use as external pieces or libraries. So those are the models, and then they define a series of ways in which those different types of team can interact with one another effectively. It's a brilliant book, and it addresses a problem that wasn't really addressed before, but is deeply important, particularly when you're doing software development at any kind of scale.
Yeah, and Matthew, I've already recorded it by. I think by the time that this will go out, his interview will be published as well. And what I've learned is that a lot of, if I remember correctly, a lot of their research is again online as well. I think it's available on not on YouTube, on GitHub. You can actually look into some of that stuff. So that's also again interesting for the people who want to learn about the science that's behind. It's not just it's not just them.
Matthew and Manuel, the authors, are very generous with information. Exactly. So there's a lot of good stuff out there,
So people can learn and try out on their own and compare themselves with some of that stuff if you do similar kind of data.
Just to do a plug, that of course I have videos on my YouTube channel on these topics too, and on nearly all of the topics that we're talking about.
I was about to say, as a reply, I think a lot of these things you go much deeper, because here we for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can the long versions on TDD, on continuous delivery. There's actually series for both of these topics and a lot more others as well. I think I will definitely link to the YouTube channel, which actually is much more popular than mine. But that's okay. I want to move to that next question, and for me, it's one of the questions I usually am very interested in knowing. And with you, I have that even more. Like, what's a question that I didn't ask you, but that you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
What's software engineering?
Okay, then I think we're off for another 3 hours, but what's the short version of the answer there?
Okay, so the short version of software engineering, I think that if we could identify software engineering, it's not going to be a specific technology. It's not going to be a particular way of drawing pictures or or anything like that. It's not going to be a mandated process, but I think it's going to be the kind of ideas that you look at and you go, oh yeah, of course, because they've always been true, and they will always be true to a large extent. Certainly we learn more. So in my book about software engineering, I define 10 things that I think characterize software engineering in 2 categories. So one of them is optimizing for learning. I think software is an exploratory discipline, so we ought to be doing what we can to become experts at learning. And so for that, we need to work iteratively in small steps. We need to gather feedback so that we can understand the results from our iterations. We need to work incrementally so we can build systems up piece by piece by piece, assembling the results of those small steps into bigger, more complicated things. We need to treat each piece of work as a little experiment, giving us the freedom to fail that we talked about before, and through the iteration and the feedback, the ease of identifying the failures. And if it's going to be engineering, it needs to be empirical. We need to be able to determine in the real world the impact of our choices, because we are always going to get things wrong. And sometimes those might be important things. The way that engineering works is that we can, however fast our little cycles are, we're not going to get those perfectly right. But in engineering works over long periods of time to avoid common mistakes so that they never happen again. That's why aeroplanes are so safe today. They used to be death traps, but now they're safe. So I think that's one.
They follow their own guidelines, because we have some.
Yeah.
I think, didn't you have a video also about airplanes going some of the troubles there were? Yeah, I think so.
Yes. Yeah.
It's because that's I really like that, and you give that as an example, because indeed in engineering we typically do, well, we build multiple planes and then we learn along the way.
Yeah.
But the feedback loops on building planes or designing planes is very long, I would say.
Yes.
In software, it's going much faster. We actually
We
using
have
the tools to improve. So
yeah, I think we have lots of advantages in software actually, but we don't always take advantage of them. So we can run literally millions of tests after every change if we really want to. If you're building an aeroplane, you don't get to do that. You get to have you have to try out a few things and hopefully you don't kill too many pilots while you're trying them out. But
well, I think these days, I hope a lot of the things they're testing is also in software, in a way that trying out what happens there.
That's another of our advantages in all other forms of engineering these days. They'll be using maths and they'll be using computer simulations of whatever it is that they're building to try ideas out. But they're still going to build the real thing and try it out. With us, our computer simulations are the real thing.
Exactly.
So we don't have to do that. So we can do a better job of that than they can, than people working.
And I would say, with good observation tools in place, observability, we can actually look real life, is it working or not?
Yeah.
And we can adapt it and deploy a new version within seconds, or within after we run our tests, that it proved that it's actually somehow better, which is kind of hard. Well, the software of the cars or the planes we can update, but the hardware we can't adjust, of course. That's
unless you're Tesla.
Yeah, but they
control factories are quite a good tool.
But that again, they
so let me just finish off the engineering thing. So the other 5 things are about managing complexity. The systems that we build are extremely complicated and very fragile, because software is. So I've got 5 things for that as well. So we need to build systems that are more modular, more cohesive, have better separation of concerns, use abstraction to isolate one part of the system from another, and minimize the coupling between the pieces. All in all, what all of these things add up to is we need to build software that's easy to change. Good software, by definition, I would argue, is easy to change. And if it's hard to change, it's not good software. Whatever else it does, it might be useful, but it's not good software unless it's easy to change. The alternative to that is that we get everything right first time. And we're almost never going to get everything right first time for a complex system.
Way you're kind of making this distinction between software and hardware. If it's hard to change, it's almost hardware, and in a way
Yeah,
that is, and that's
yeah.
yeah,
That's what it ought to be like, I think. Yes.
right. That's yeah, that's but again, it depends. To change the software on these kind of things. Device that was on Mars, so there were things that we were able to update at some point, I would say. Um, with things that went wrong in that direction, we can go very deeply on some of these things. But really thankful because it's just a couple of minutes that give a brief overview of again what's in your book on modern software engineering. I would say definitely worth a read for many people if they want to learn more. And also for me, kind of taking again back that definition of what software as engineering is, because that, yeah, for a long time people have been discussing, is it or is it not really engineering? And I think more and more we go to a point, and I think your book is really making that point. Yes, it is engineering if you apply all these practices that are scientific.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, it's not because some of the theses that we say are wrong that the whole, and that it's no longer engineering. I think we changed a lot of way we think about physics also since, I don't know, 100 years, and it's
Yeah.
still called yeah, it's still a science, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, so really thankful for that answer. Let's move to that very last question. Who do you think I should ask next?
I think you should ask Kent Beck. I've spoken to Kent on my channel, and he's such a
For those
fantastic
who
guest.
don't know him, this is Kent.
He's not got a hat there. He's usually got a hat.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but so why should I invite him? Why do you think he's?
Kent Beck. I agile thinking. Your channel is about agile thinking. Agile thinking was probably largely initiated by Kent Beck and his team, at least in a way that you could kind of form it into a coherent idea. There were people coming from other directions, but extreme programming was at the core of many of those things. Scrum was originally invented as a way of organizing the planning around extreme programming. So I think that Kent is, close to the original source, and he's such a brilliant, insightful man, and talks about ideas in an engaging way. So I would definitely recommend talking to Kent if you're able to get hold of him.
I think that part might be the hardest part, but yeah, I'll definitely love to, because it's also, I think his book on extreme programming is the most cited book. That's, even if
Yeah,
people don't mention it, it's interesting that I don't think it was ever the book as the book to read, but in so many different of the talks, I think 1/3 of the talks, people mention that book as it
yeah,
started their career. They learned so much from it,
yeah,
and it's still, I personally am a fan of both versions, because that book, there's two
yeah,
versions of it. I really advise people to look for the first edition. It's not that the second is bad. I really like both versions. I really encourage people to read both versions, because it's both of them have really had a big impact on me.
yeah.
It's and I think a lot of people. So yeah,
And there are lots of ideas in it that are still perfectly applicable, but that people don't talk about much anymore. So one of the attributes that Kent talks about to make extreme programming work is courage, which nobody talks about that anymore. But it's absolutely true. You've got to have enough confidence, enough courage, if you like, to start working when you don't know the answers, and that's how
exactly.
we solve hard problems.
I think there is, well, the values. XP values, that is so, we don't talk indeed enough about these things. Metaphors, I mean, that's the
Yeah.
other thing that a lot of people don't always understand, but they have a huge impact on how you think about things and how you explain things.
I think
Well,
he's
actually,
trying to expand on that quite a lot with his new series of books. So starting with Tidy First.
yeah, that's the yeah. I love that book. And it was also published in a more agile way, in a way that
Yeah.
you could read it. You can buy. Well, I don't know, buy it, but I mean, on what was it, Medium? I think
Substack.
that
You can subscribe on
subscribe.
Substack.
Exactly, and I've learned so much about that whole process while doing it. Again, a nice example of somebody who's keep learning, who also said that when he worked at Facebook, he rethought about how he learned on TDD. I think, wasn't it on your show that he also talked about the mini version of TDD, the
Yes.
shorter version? Yeah, that's wonderful. I haven't tried that out myself, but just the idea is like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
that's again. So
It
even
tends,
some,
so just for the audience, the idea is you do TDD, but if you commit a test that fails, it reverts all of the code. So it deletes your code basically. So it keeps you honest. It kind of forces you to work in the small steps that we've been talking about.
exactly, and that's. But it's such a nice example of a person that already has such a vast career, has so much influence, has so much things, and he just keeps learning and
Yeah.
trying out and stays very humble. I would say,
Yeah.
like, he's also not wanting to be the forefront and it's like, oh, no, he's just learning on his own. And
No,
yeah.
he's a very nice chap. He's also got my favorite description of good software design. Good software design is about moving the stuff that's related closer together and the stuff that's unrelated further apart.
I think I've heard them talk about that.
Yeah.
So that's. But yeah, I think we can keep talking definitely about him. Many people like I said, I will try to get a hold of him and see if that works or not. So thank you for inviting him. Now, Dave, it's been wonderful. Almost 2 hours that we've been talking. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So probably the easiest way for me to explain is you can look at my YouTube channel, which is called Continuous Delivery.
And I think
You can find me on
the channel.
social media. Great, thank you. You can also find me on social media at Dave Farley 77. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at the moment.
I think that's the Blue Sky one, Dave Farley.
Cool.
I think that's the one. Yeah, Twitter, I mention a lot less these days because it's kind of weird these days on how it's going. But yeah, I think for me, Blue Sky feels a little bit or a lot like the very first days of Twitter. So
yes, it's quite refreshing. Yeah,
it's nice to see that. But really thankful for spending that time with me. I really enjoyed it. I was looking forward, and it actually gave everything I was looking forward to. So thank you for that time.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Well, yeah, but it was fun doing it, and it's always interesting to hear people like you who have all that experience and still having so much passion to bring it on and showing a little bit on where it's coming from, because that's somehow that sometimes people forget that, well, you're just a human person that has that experience and is still learning in all these kind of things. And I loved how you what you mentioned about that small little company of your family doing that business. I think not everybody realizes when you create something like such a successful YouTube channel what that really means to get this running, and that's kind of nice to be able to do that with your family. So that's
very
really
nice indeed. Yeah, thank you
to bring that. So thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.